something we're really focused on. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses this morning on those topics and others. And with that, I will yield to the ranking member, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the entrance of one of our former colleagues, Ms. Mordayo. Good to see of Guam. Good to see you again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do thank the witnesses for being here and the time that it took to prepare for this. The conflict between the Chinese Communist Party and American democracy will be one of the greatest tests this nation has ever faced. A modernized military, well-armed allies, and a lethal Taiwan are essential to countering China. But we also need operational concepts that are executable. Over the past year, members of this committee have asked questions about INDOPACOM's ability to carry out its operational requirements. To date, we've gotten few answers to serious questions about contested logistics, few answers on accelerating new infrastructure, and few answers on delivering new technology to the battlefield. To make matters worse, the Secretary announced Monday his intention to close the massive Red Hill fuel depot within a year. Red Hill has serious problems, but the Secretary closed Red Hill without laying out the resources needed to replace that capacity. That's extremely short-sighted. The response from the Department has been the same. The answer is just one policy announcement away, and that's unacceptable. What I would like to hear from each of you today is exactly how you will employ new operational concepts, build new systems, and ensure logistics support at new operating locations throughout the Indo-Pacific. But most importantly, I want to know how you intend to do that in the next 5 years. We all know China is not going to give us 10 or 20 years to prepare for the conflict. We simply cannot procrastinate any further. The issues like Red Hill present an opportunity to modernize beyond the World War II logistics model. But I'm deeply worried about the cycle of indecision and procrastination at the Pentagon. And I'm also worried about getting this important work done in the time frame that we have to act. This committee has tried to provide the Department the capabilities it needs to deter China and ensure we prevail if conflict arises. But we can't move with purpose if the Department can't define its requirements. We've tried to nail those down in the PDI. Congress created the Pacific Deterrence Initiative to highlight and expedite the most essential capabilities. But the Pentagon kneecapped the PDI process last year with poor guidance and unclear plans. I hope the DoD can rectify that in this year's budget submission. On top of all this, we've tasked General LaCamera with holding off North Korea. In any other year, North Korea's repeated missile tests would be front-page news. General, you so happen to pick a very busy time to start trying to deal with your challenges over there. The South Koreans are essential allies, and deepening our defense cooperation with them makes us all safer. We want to know what you need to secure the Korean Peninsula in the coming decade. This committee is ready to make bold investments in our defense. I hope to hear today that the Department is ready to do the same. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Dr. Ratner.
Well, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and it's a privilege to be here with Admiral Aquilino and General LaCamera. As you know, the Indo-Pacific is the priority theater for the Department of Defense, and we remain committed to upholding a free and open regional order. At the same time, the region faces mounting security challenges, particularly from the People's Republic of China, the PRC, which has adopted a more coercive and assertive approach to advancing its authoritarian interests. North Korea's weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs also constitute a serious threat to the United States and our allies and partners. Mr. Chairman, Secretary Austin has described the PRC as the Department's top pacing challenge. This prioritization will be reflected in the forthcoming National Defense Strategy and FY23 budget as we continue to update our concepts, capabilities, and force posture to defend the homeland, deter aggression, and prepare to prevail in conflict. We are prioritizing capabilities relevant to the China challenge to enable a joint force that is lethal and able to strike adversary forces and systems at range, resilient and able to gain information advantage and maintain command and control through adversary disruptions, survivable and agile in the face of adversary attacks that seek to reduce combat power and mobilization speed, and able to provide the logistics and sustainment needed for operations in a highly contested environment. Alongside these capabilities, we are building a combat-credible force posture in the Indo-Pacific, working toward a more distributed, lethal, and resilient forward posture essential to addressing the full suite of challenges we face in the region. We are also doubling down on one of our greatest strategic advantages, our network of allies and partners. As I look across the region, I see our defense ties growing at a rapid pace. With the U.S.-Japan alliance as the cornerstone of regional peace, we are deepening our defense cooperation with the Japan Self-Defense Forces, optimizing our alliance force posture, and integrating the alliance into a broader regional security network of like-minded nations. We are also continuing to strengthen the U.S.-ROK alliance, the linchpin of peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in the Indo-Pacific region, remaining focused on enhancing deterrence and alliance readiness. The U.S.-Australia alliance is also surging forward with considerable momentum. Last year, we announced several new initiatives to substantially deepen force posture cooperation in land, air, and maritime domains, and we announced the historic AUKUS trilateral security partnership with the United Kingdom and Australia. We recognize the importance of our alliances with the Philippines and Thailand as well, as we are proud of the work we have done to revive the Visiting Forces Agreement with the Philippines and the steps we are taking to strengthen our security cooperation with our Thai allies. Likewise, we are seeing historic progress in our major defense partnership with India as we continue to integrate and operationalize our day-to-day defense cooperation and logistics, enhance information sharing, and grow our bilateral cooperation in emerging domains such as space and cyberspace. And we've been working throughout Southeast Asia to strengthen capabilities and improve our interoperability with partners including Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Timor-Leste. We are also bringing our partners together with colleagues across the U.S. government to elevate the Quad as a premier regional grouping while we remain committed to ASEAN centrality. Consistent with our commitment to our One China policy, the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances, we are focused on maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. With the PRC as the department's pacing challenge, Taiwan is the pacing scenario, and we aim to deter and deny PRC aggression through a combination of Taiwan's own defenses, its partnership with the United States, and growing support from like-minded democracies. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to close by thanking all of you for your strong, bipartisan support for the Indo-Pacific. It is my firm belief that this bipartisanship is one of our most powerful assets in rising to the China challenge and should be nurtured and treated as such. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral Aquilino.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, and the distinguished members of the committee, thank you for also allowing me to appear today and have a conversation. I really, truly appreciated our closed session yesterday. Thank you for that. I also would like to thank all of you for your dedicated support to the Indo-Pacific Command, our service members, and their families. The People's Republic of China is the most consequential strategic competitor that the United States has faced. They are executing a dedicated campaign that utilizes all forms of national power in an attempt to uproot the rules-based international order to the benefit of themselves and at the expense of all others. Russia also presents some serious risks. As evident from their unprovoked and unjustified attack on the Ukraine, Russia has no regard for international law, its own commitments, or any principles that uphold global peace. Similarly, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK, as well as violent extremist organizations, also pose acute threats to peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. To address these threats, Secretary Austin has articulated clear priorities: defend the homeland, deter our adversaries, and strengthen our allies and partners. These priorities are advanced through integrated deterrence, which is the department's approach to preventing conflict through the synchronization of all elements of national power, coordinated with the joint force across all domains together with our allies and partners. INDOPACOM's mission is to prevent conflict through the execution of integrated deterrence. And should deterrence fail, we must be prepared to fight and win. Seize the Initiative describes INDOPACOM's approach to accomplishing these missions. This approach requires the joint force to think, act, and operate differently by realigning our posture, advancing our warfighting capabilities, in order to provide the President and the Secretary with options across the entire spectrum of competition, crisis, or conflict. Effective deterrence requires significant investment to defend the homeland, protect the joint force, operate in contested space, and provide all-domain battle space awareness with an integrated fires network that synchronizes the joint force. These initiatives are incorporated into the theater campaign plan. They are facilitated and supported by agile logistics, a robust experimentation program, as well as exercises, and constant collaboration with our allies and partners to promote peace in the region. We must take concerted efforts to increase our resilience and strengthen our capabilities through sustained investments, utilizing predictable budgets, a strong industrial base, and reliable supply chains. I'm optimistic we will see a strategy-based FY23 budget that takes the appropriate initial steps to address key adversarial challenges and increase our warfighting advantages. The resources we commit now and in the future will preserve a free and open Indo-Pacific, strengthen our deterrence posture, and provide us the ability to fight and win should deterrence fail. Thanks to the committee, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General LaCamera.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear with you today. I appreciate your leadership and dedication in supporting our total force and our families who work with our Korean allies and United Nations sending states in order to maintain a stable and secure environment on the Korean Peninsula. I would also like to thank President Biden, Secretary Austin, and General Milley for their continued leadership and support, along with Admiral Aquilino, the functional combatant commanders who support us, my fellow component commanders, and my interagency colleagues. It's easy to stand on freedom's frontier with this tremendous support. Finally, I want to thank our Korean hosts and their professional military. I'm pleased to update you on the great work done by our dedicated personnel who serve in the Republic of Korea. They are professionally executing the missions of the United Nations Command, Combined Forces Command, and the United States Forces Korea. The United States Republic of Korea alliance was forged in the crucible of battle, while the Democratic People's Republic of Korea continues to pose multiple threats to the region and international security. This alliance remains the linchpin of regional stability and has prevented a resumption of the hostilities that shredded peace on the Korean Peninsula some 72 years ago. It remains ironclad, and our service members, along with the Republic of Korea military, are trained and ready to respond to a provocation or crisis if called upon. Our three commands, United Nations Command, Combined Forces Command, and United States Forces Korea, must remain vigilant, prepared, and ready. Under one commander, these three commands are empowered to maintain a stabilized security environment for the Republic of Korea, our regional allies, and our partners. We have international legitimacy through the United Nations Command, whose mission is to enforce the 1953 Armistice Agreement, coordinate UN sending state contributions, and execute assigned functions directed by the United States national authorities through the Joint Chiefs of Staff to preserve peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. We are proud of the combined teamwork of the U.S.-Korean alliance. Combined Forces Command is the combined warfighting headquarters representing the U.S.-Korea bilateral military partnership. Formed in 1978, it's a unique entity that takes policy, direction, and missions from the Combined Military Committee and is governed by and subject to binational decision-making and consensus. We maintain our strong U.S. commitment to Korea. U.S. Forces Korea is the premier joint force committed to defending the security of the Republic of Korea. It's disciplined, trained, and ready to fight tonight, respond in crisis, and win in conflict. Central to meeting any threats is resourcing the strengthening of our force and best possible care of our families. I'm grateful for your support and leadership in these no-fail tasks. I know you're aware of South Korea's
powerful economic, military, and technical standings. No doubt you're aware of their social impact. All of this is part of the hard work, discipline, and dedication of the Korean people, all done under the security umbrella of the U.S.-Korea alliance. The Republic of Korea is an incredible ally, and it's a privilege to move into the future together with them in the land of the morning calm. I'm honored to command and serve this dedicated multinational combined and joint force in one of the most significant dynamic regions of the world. Those who serve there are committed, capable, and well-supported. The force is postured to deter aggression, protect U.S. interests, and if needed, defeat any adversary. As long as the threat persists, the U.S.-Korean alliance remains vigilant, determined, and steadfast in defense of the Korean Peninsula and across the region. As the commander of these incredible service members, I appreciate this committee's continued support to fully prepare them to fight and win on the most dangerous piece of ground, the last 100 meters of land, sea, and air. Under one flag, Kachikapshida, we go together, fight tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an opening statement. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. One programming note before we get going with questions. There are going to be votes at some point. It is my intention to continue the hearing through the votes because it would be impossible if we had to take that delay. There's about half hour, probably 40 minutes between the two votes. So we're just going to rotate people in and out, and we'll figure out how we're going to do that. But we're going to keep going. General LaCamera, so we talked a little bit about the alliances and the different pieces out there. First of all, I know South Korea is, I think, just completed their elections as we're sitting here, or in the middle of them at any rate, so curious how that's going if you've heard. But how do you see South Korea, not just in terms of North Korea, though I want to hear about that as well, fitting into the larger partnership? We've talked about the Quad that we've developed with Japan, Australia, and India and other partners. How does South Korea view the competition with China in the region, and how can we best use them as a partner and an ally in the region for that? And then I would be curious to get your sort of latest take on what North Korea is thinking with their latest missile tests and how you evaluate that threat at the moment.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the challenge with the Republic of Korea is that, the first thing they'll tell you is their economic partner is China, their security partner is the United States, and that can be a little bit concerning because as we go forward, the concern is always, are they or the North Koreans, and really to your second question, are they trying to drive a wedge between us, the United States, and the Republic of Korea as a way of winning without fighting? THAAD was a perfect example in 2017 where they put some economic pressure on the Republic of Korea. We have seemed to come out of that. We have THAAD up and running, and we continue to move forward. I look at the Republic of Korea and, quite frankly, the United Nations sending states and the ROC U.S. or the Australian alliance or Japanese alliance as opportunities to get the Koreans off the peninsula to do some additional training as training becomes a little bit restricted, but also to expose them to other militaries. When it comes to DPRK, I think he is focused solely internally on protecting his regime, and that's what this nuclear testing and the missiles is really about, protecting his position in the world.
Thank you. And Dr. Ratner and Admiral Aquilino, when it comes to the big question of how we present a legitimate deterrence to China in the region, given what they've done in the last decade, and I know it's no one thing, but if you could sort of sum up how we need to change our military capability, because in terms of where we should spend our money, what programs we should put the highest priority on, what are the capability or capabilities that we most need to get better at and develop to counter what China has done?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll go first if it's okay with Dr. Ratner. First of all, I think we must look through the PRC issue as not just today, right? So it's a short-term problem, it's a medium-term problem, and it's a long-term problem. So I can tell you what we're doing today as it applies to adjusting our posture, both of places we operate from, the amount and position of forces where we put it is important. That power in a place that matters with the right capabilities today is the deterrent factor. Combine that with the exercising operations with our allies and partners presents a pretty good deterrent force today. On the capability side, in the mid and longer term, I appreciate the department's support for some of the asks, and I highlighted a couple of them in my statement, right? So the ability to operate in contested space consistently and survivably, as you highlighted in your statement. The ability to have persistent battle space awareness of all things going on.
I guess we kind of know that part. The question is, what does that mean? Okay, so to do that, we need to build this and not build that. We need to develop this technology. We need to develop that technology. What's going to survive in that environment? What do we need to put our money in so that that happens?
Yeah, integrated and resilient, sustainable ISR capabilities, a network that links all of that together and displays it for all forces on the battlefield in a consistent way, and then ultimately the ability to close those kill chains with the correct weapons and fires.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Ratner?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I would add is, in addition to the capabilities that Admiral Aquilino mentioned, we are working to update operational concepts, as you know, with the joint warfighting concept, a more distributed force posture, and then building our allies and partners into our deterrence frameworks as well.
So basically, we need to make sure we don't have a few big, rich targets. We need to have, sort of redundancy, spread out, survivable systems so that no matter what China does, we can continue to communicate and continue to operate.
Yeah, I would say the characteristics of the force that I described in my opening statement are the ones that drive the capabilities investments: lethality, resilience, sustainability, survivability, and being agile and responsive, exactly as you described, Mr. Chairman, in your opening statement.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, never did get the answer to the chairman's question. Who won the election, or do we know the results?
When I came in here, Congressman, it's too close to call right now, so.
Sounds familiar. We've had that problem around here for a while. You talked about the stepped-up testing by North Korea. How does the maturing North Korean missile capability affect your posture?
Ballistic missile defense is a top priority. Protection, making sure that Admiral Aquilino just brought up on the, ISR. Typically we say ISR is one noun, but to me it's three verbs. And making sure that we can see into what he's doing, and can we get after a kill web to interdict, prevent it from, from striking South Korea or striking any U.S. interests in the region.
Do you have adequate ISR in your opinion?
Currently, I do. The challenge right now is placement and access, given the comprehensive military agreement between the Republic of Korea and the DPRK.
When you look at your posture and your responsibilities, what is the one thing that we could help you most with in addressing capability issues? And one of the things that I'm always mindful of is the huge number of rocket launchers he has near Seoul, and how you would defend against that onslaught.
Yeah, there's two threats to that. There's the conventional threat, is artillery, long-range artillery that can range Seoul from the north, and then his theater ballistic missile capability that he's developing. So it's the Patriot THAAD, and making sure that we have the redundancy and the resiliency and the number of arrows. But to me, it's more than just trading arrows for arrows. We've got to make sure that we can get after the entire kill web to be able to get into his systems. And I can provide a much better description of this in a secure environment.
I understand. Well, we need to know, because we want to give you what you need, so get it to us in whatever fashion you need to. Dr. Ratner, we need to convince our allies and partners that we're in the Pacific for the long haul. I think that we on this committee genuinely mean that. How can we build that credibility in the region, in your view?
Thank you, sir. I think there are a few elements we can do to ensure that the region believes that we're going to be there for the long haul. Primarily, many of those occur outside the military domain and certainly the jurisdiction of the Defense Department in terms of active diplomacy and an active trade and investment strategy and leadership in the region. That's probably the most important thing we could do. But from a military perspective, I think maintaining our forward posture, continuing to invest in our alliances, and working with partners on issues that are important to them, not just issues that are important to us, is the right formula.
Great. And Admiral, closing Red Hill is going to impact your operations. Can you tell me or tell this committee how you intend to address that closure?
Thank you, sir. Absolutely. As we looked and developed options for senior leader decisions with regard to Red Hill, again, we had 3 criteria that we had to make sure we were getting right. Number 1, clean water for the people of Hawaii, service members and their families. Number 2, we had to be able to meet the war plan and the war fighting requirements. And then third, we obviously always look at costs and ensure we're good stewards of the taxpayers' money. We developed a plan that actually goes in alignment with how we talked about a more distributed plan, both forward and land-based, combined with a sea-based component to allow for a more distributed, survivable, resilient network of fuels, as well as meeting all the security and the strategic fuel reserve requirements. So as we looked at this, I think we're actually going to be in a better place and we meet all 3 requirements as I laid out.
What time frame is going to be needed to make this transition?
Congressman, I think we'll go in coordination with all of the members that are working this. That's the EPA, the Hawaii Department of Health, and the Department of Defense. We will go as fast as safe allows. We have to make sure the facility is safe to transfer that fuel into the places we're going to send it. But we're certainly not waiting. As soon as we can get it done, we'll be ready to move. And as soon as we're able to contract some of those other facilities as well as the sea-based option.
So you're not closing Red Hill until you have this new capability in place?
We will close Red Hill. I think the Secretary's announcement was within the year, and that just allows us to be able to distribute that fuel with the contract requirements, the sea-based requirements, and the need to put it in the correct spots.
That's my point, though. I want to make sure that you're going to be able to fuel your O-plans when you close that place.
Yes, sir. We'll be able to do it, and we'll be able to do it fairly quickly, I
Great.
think.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Larson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Admiral. Thanks, Chair. Admiral, earlier this year, the Army began developing and testing a tactical cloud system that would be deployed in the Indo-Pacific region. Can you, in this setting, explain why that would be important for the Indo-Pacific?
Thanks, Congressman. So, first of all, the ability to make sure that our data is safe, secure in a cyber environment is critical. So that's one portion of it. Additionally, it's going to help to support one of our primary initiatives called a mission partner environment, which is the ability in a cyber-safe environment to share information with all of our partners, to be able to coordinate events, operations, exercises through a single communication mechanism. So really, it kind of comes down to the ability to defend our information and our data.
Yeah. So I want to build out from that for Dr. Ratner and how, because this gets to the importance of the tyranny of distance, but also closing that through secure communications among friends and allies. Building that, sort of using that hub and spoke model that we used post-World War II to build out our friends and alliances in the Pacific. How are we going to assess what countries are, earn their way into this communication network, into this one as well as any others that we're trying to set up in that region?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Larson. And Admiral Aquilino may want to say another word on some of the communications networks that he's looking to build in the region. I'll just say we are in careful analysis and consultation with our partners on their information security, both assessing them, helping them improve and clean up their networks, and moving in ways that are deliberate and ensure that we're not building that network so fast that it's going to be compromised. So this is something we take quite seriously. PRC penetration of networks throughout the region is quite severe and is something we need to manage.
Admiral?
Yeah, thanks, sir. So we're obviously concerned about everyone's networks, our own and all of our allies and partners. This mission partner environment, allows us to work together with them to be able to develop the maximum security that we have access to and then align it with all of our partners. So there's really kind of two wins here in this objective.
Yeah, let me take one more step on this conversation. Dr. Ratner alludes to it, what China, the PRC is doing in the last several years, and I think we've talked about this earlier last year, perhaps on a call, has reorganized the PLA to include their strategic support forces, which are both network and space, including cyber and EW and a variety of other things. So on this point, not to tell us what's in the budget, because 22 years I realized that would be a waste of time to ask you before the budget got here. Could you generally say perhaps that the budget investment reflects the need to be responsive to the development of the SSF and what it's doing, how the PLA is using the strategic support forces, as well as getting ahead of that, as well as doing the investments regardless of whether or not the SSF existed?
Yes, Congressman, without getting into details about the budget, I can assure you that the department is very focused on these issues. We had an opportunity earlier this week to do a tabletop exercise with members of this committee in which we focused on specifically on some of these areas, including space and cyber. And you'll see in the Secretary's concept of integrated deterrence, which Admiral Aquilino mentioned, part of the rationale there is that we ourselves need to be integrating across domains, including space and cyber, as we think about this competition.
Yeah, we'll move there. Just a little time left. Have you, if you can share this, given the Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, have you seen a change in Russian force posture in their east?
Thanks, Congressman. So absolutely in preparation. They pushed out 20 ships and submarines, as we can count. They placed them in defensive positions. They postured other forces to be able to defend their eastern flank. So we absolutely have seen a change, and we continue to monitor those like we do every day.
All right, thanks. I'll ask the question and take it for the record, but it has to do with India's ambivalent role right now relative to U.S. security interests with regards to Ukraine, and I'll develop something specific for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Turner is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, in your written comments, you reference the United Kingdom and joint exercises that were held with both the U.S. and others, and you also mentioned that the F-35. I want to read to you the provision that's here, and I have two questions with you. One is, could you tell us about partner nations that are outside Indo-PACOM that are assisting in the area, and also the role of the F-35? You state that the UK has demonstrated its immense capacity to project combat power into the region. The Queen Elizabeth Carrier Strike Task Group, which included embarked UK and US Marine Corps F-35Bs. So I'm assuming we both had F-35s, that there were escort ships from both the Netherlands and the United States. And then you also cite the acquisition by the Republic of Korea for the F-35A. Could you tell us of your work with other partner nations and the role of the F-35 in the area?
Thanks, Congressman. So the importance of the F-35 can't be overstated, right? So when we talked in the beginning, the PRC has developed a set of systems in an attempt to keep the United States out of the Pacific. The F-35 from the air domain is critical to be able to operate in that contested space. That fifth-generation airplane with the highest technology available.
You're referencing China's J-20?
I'm referencing our F-35.
But I mean, when you're talking about China also as a pure threat in the area, that you're looking to their equipment as an additional need for the F-35.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. So they have just begun production of their J-20, their first fifth-generation airplane, which ups the ante. And again, with the technology and the capability of the F-35, that's why it's so critical. As it applies to being able to operate in that contested space, the technologies that come with that airplane allow it to happen.
And then joint exercises, you referenced the UK and Netherlands.
So when we talk about integrated deterrence, that's a pretty good example of one operation that we've done. The UK, as you know, have built and have now deployed one of their aircraft carrier strike groups. We did an operation with 7 nations, 4 big deck ships. The Japanese provided one of their large deck DDHs. The Queen Elizabeth was there, and as well was the Ronald Reagan and the USS Carl Vinson. That was combined with all of our domain capabilities in the form of bombers, ground forces, cyber capabilities, space capabilities, and worked together with 7 nations, the Netherlands, Australians, Canadians. Again, I think that the friends and partners outside of the region also understand the importance of the region, and we see them operate with us, hopefully, more frequently. The French come to the regions. You most recently read about the Germans deploying to the Pacific. I'm hoping and working to get more of that. And with those partners, we operate with them all the time.
Well, my next question relates to exercises and also with the Republic of Korea. General, you mentioned trying to get people out of the area because of restrictions with respect to exercises. As part of our 2021 NDAA, we required, as part of the Pacific deterrence, an actual plan to be provided us by your command admiral. And in it, it listed exercises as one of the primary focus and goals. It also, unfortunately, includes information that your funding was cut for exercises in 2022. I'm aware that there have been, I believe, some over-concerns about the issues of provocation of exercises. When it's one of your primary goals of exercises, and we know our partners that are in the region need exercises to be effective, what are we doing to ensure that that we're able to conduct exercises in the region and that we're investing appropriately and we're ensuring that the Republic of Korea has the ability to exercise without an over-concern of being provocative in the region? And I'll let all 3 of you answer that one.
Thanks, Congressman. So for the exercises, we do over 120 exercises every year. COVID has impacted some of those. We've scaled some down. We've reduced, or we've postponed some because of the COVID piece. But bottom line is, we haven't reduced any of those exercises. As a matter of fact, when I met with the chiefs of defense across the region most recently in July, what we've agreed to is actually to try to expand those into more
Mr. Secretary, do you have concerns about exercises in the region?
Congressman, I do share.
Gentleman's time's expired. If you can finish in about 10 seconds, thank you.
I would say I share Admiral Aquilino's view. I do have concerns about the readiness of our forces on the Korean Peninsula, and I know that's something we're working on.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Representative Courtney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Ratner, David Ignatius, who's been sort of covering foreign policy and military policy for quite a few years, made the observation that in terms of hard power, the AUKUS alliance with Australia and Britain is the most important strategic move in decades. And again, congratulations to the administration for helping make that come together. The response in Australia, as you and I have discussed, is very positive, 60% approval in public opinion polls. The government announced just a few days ago that they are moving forward for an eastern Navy base on the eastern side of Australia to complement Stirling, which is on the western side near Perth. So they clearly, it's all in, and that's a long-term, that's a long game commitment that's there. And I know Admiral Caldwell at Naval Reactors is hard at work with the transition. It's a big job to figure out the industrial base challenge, which is huge. But in the meantime, I mean, there's another piece of this, which is, you know, the helping the Australian Navy sort of make this transformation. And it seems to me, and a number of us, that, you know, having joint training at the nuclear power school in South Carolina for Australian sailors and officers would be, we have to do it, and why don't we start? I mean, it's a good, visible, tangible way to really show, our allies in the world that this is real, that it's not just a press release, back in September. I don't know if you're nodding, Admiral Aquilino. What's your thoughts on that?
Congressman, it really is an important step forward. I do concur with that. But I do want to remember that the submarine piece is one portion of it, right? So we're cooperating in other domains to expand our capabilities and capacities with the Australians and the Brits in the form of space and cyber, in the form of being able to develop posture and operate from there. And I'm going to be in Australia the week after next with really great partners, General Nakasone and General Dickinson, to start on that space and cyber improvement. On the submarine piece, as you know, they're studying the best way to go forward. Big decisions, and they want to go about it methodically. I spoke to Admiral Caldwell last night. We're on the same page. As soon as they're ready to start, Admiral Caldwell is ready to support with regard to the start of schooling, and then we have options to be able to bridge, right? How do we operate together, Australians on U.S., British submarines? We're going to work through that. Safety is clearly a concern from Admiral Caldwell, but we are doing everything possible to move this as fast as possible.
Well, that's good to hear. And again, I think certainly this committee is going to want to do everything to enable the success of that, and in terms of whether there's ITAR issues or whether there's, again, McMahon Act issues in terms of just clearing any, legal obstacles. Admiral, you talked about, again, the pivot away from Red Hill and the at-sea component. I think sort of spotlights the importance of sea lift. Again, in a few hours, we're going to vote on an omnibus, which adds 10 U.S. flag ships to the fleet, bring it about to 90. And again, these are not new construction. These are used ships that are going to be U.S. flagged and with a stipend enabled to do that. But I mean, it still seems like it's still a big enterprise, to have that disbursement, which I do think makes sense. I mean, can you talk about sea lift in terms of just, it's sometimes overlooked in the grand strategy discussions?
Yes, sir. It's critical to the approach and the position to be able to be more distributed in many different locations, both ashore and at sea. You're talking about the sea-based component of that. And I thank the committee for the support for the TSP. A great partner, General Van Oost, and her command identified in a previous study that there was risk with regard to the number and access to U.S. flag tankers. This is a great step to start in that direction, and again, I believe it will contribute to the result and the way forward on Red Hill. So it's really important across all sea lift, not just fuel.
Can you comment on what sea lift means in the terms of the North Korean peninsula?
Yes, Congressman. And Admiral Aquilino and I have had this conversation, when does strategic movement become operational maneuver? And at what point, is he responsible for delivering to a certain point? Then I've got to secure it, bringing it in. There's tremendous capacity on the peninsula right now but for the Korean people. But we're going to rely on Japan to bring supplies in and forces. We're going to rely on sea lift and airlift to build our combat power for any crisis or conflict.
Thank you. Mr. Lamborn is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Ratner, in the last NDAA, I offered language and the committee supported it, asking for a report on asymmetrical defensive capabilities on the part of Taiwan. Ground-based anti-ship cruise missiles, ground-based cruise missiles, and anti-ship mines. And I believe that got caught up in a larger report request that the Secretary is supposed to produce for this committee. And is that coming along satisfactorily? Because the importance of these reports is so that we can make sure our industry partners are producing these kinds of armaments sufficiently, and that secondly, that they're getting into the hands of our Taiwanese partners and friends. So will that report be forthcoming soon?
Congressman, I'll have to check on the exact timing of that report. As you know, I was before this committee probably about 6 weeks ago and did an in-depth classified briefing on Taiwan in particular, and we discussed each of these capabilities in depth. The department is extremely focused on ensuring we can get these in the hands of the Taiwans as quickly as possible, and I'd be happy to, in advance of the report, to provide your office with any additional information.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. Admiral Aquilino, there is a lot of concern by many of us about hypersonic weapons and how China, Russia, and even North Korea are doing what they can in this area. What are your concerns about their progress, and what do we need to do better on our part?
Thanks, Congressman. So the real concern is the speed and pace at which they're showing up, as you articulated. So that's the issue. That we have security challengers that are working towards capabilities that are challenging. We're getting after it through my number one unfunded request, as articulated, was a defense of Guam system to get right after this issue. Now, it's complex. We're coordinating with the department, but we need to be able to defend both our people, right? Defend the homeland, the Secretary's number one priority, as well as the forces and where we place them to be able to operate.
Now, you mentioned Guam, and you said in your posture statement that Guam's strategic importance is difficult to overstate. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Absolutely, Congressman. The area in the Indo-Pacific is expansive. Half the globe, and a lot of it water. So to be able to posture forces in places that matter with the right capabilities, we've focused on Guam as a strategic hub, as you would expect. Governor Guerrero is a wonderful partner and a patriot. And as you know, it's about $11 billion worth of construction as we work through posturing of our forces that will end up on Guam, so we have to protect it.
And lastly, can you enlighten us regarding the department's progress in, this is for Secretary Ratner, the department's progress in prioritization of missile defense funding for Guam?
Yes, Congressman, the department is currently in the final stages of the missile defense review, which will lay out strategy and priorities, and that should be forthcoming alongside the National Defense Strategy, hopefully in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back to you.
Thank you. Mr. Keating is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question, just 2 days ago, UK's Foreign Minister, Liz Truss, said to Parliament there in London that the reason that India abstained in the UN recently on the vote about Russian aggression was both economic and defense oriented. Could you enlighten any of us as to what areas of defense she could have been alluding to, and what is your opinion on how India's inability to, vote at the UN in favor of condemning Russia for the aggression, how that could be defense oriented on their part?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. I can start on that. And there was a reference earlier to this issue as well. What I would just start by saying is that from the U.S. perspective, I think India is an absolutely essential partner as we think about our strategy in the Indo-Pacific, and both in terms of how we're building coalition partners as well as dealing with potential adversaries. We recognize that India has a complicated history and relationship with Russia. The majority of their weapons they buy from the Russians. The good news is that they are in a multi-year process of diversifying their arms purchases away from Russia. That's going to take some time, but they are clearly committed to doing that, including increasing the indigenization of their own defense industry, and that's something we should support. So I think in terms of the overall relationship and in terms of their relationship with Russia, the trend lines are moving in the right direction.
All right. China's mentioned its investment advancing their own technology. I'm particularly interested in unmanned underwater technology that they might have. Can you talk to us about what they're doing and what you think we should be doing to expand our footprint in this kind of technology.
Thank you, Congressman. As we've watched, right, this is the largest military buildup that we've seen since World War II coming out of the PRC, and that includes all domains. It also includes all types of technologies. Congressman Moulton and I had a conversation yesterday about some of those. So we shouldn't be surprised to see them advancing their unmanned capabilities in all domains. When we continue to watch it, we'd have to have additional conversations at a classified level.
But is it an area that we ourselves are stepping up the game on?
We absolutely are. As you know, we've been leading the path for unmanned. I think I saw the CNO last week talked about a fleet that includes both manned and unmanned. As you know, we already operate Global Hawks, Predators, and other types of unmanned domains. So it's an opportunity for us that we have to continue to explore and expand.
Good. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for having this important hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Whitman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank our witnesses for joining us today. Admiral Aquilino, I want to go to you and go back a year when Admiral Davidson was here as your predecessor, and he talked about the erosion of strategic deterrence in that region and how incredibly important that is to make sure we keep the Chinese at bay. I know that you spoke about the battle force as it exists today with the PLA Navy of approximately 350 ships and submarines, and more than 130 of those are major surface combatants. You also spoke about having a fleet of 420 battleships by 2025, and I'll add that DOD says that by 2030, the PLA Navy probably has about 460 ships. That is very, very different than the course that we are on with the number of ships that we have. And it's not just the number of ships that we're building, but it's also the A-sub-O, as you know, operational availability for the ships that we have. Many times maintenance availability is extended or time at sea extended, so we're wearing our ships out faster because we're double pumping them on deployments. From your perspective, if we're unable to accelerate the fielding of new vessels and maintaining the vessels that we have to have a high level of A-sub-O operational availability, what do you think will be the primary risks going forward in the next 5 years in Indo-PACOM?
Thanks, Congressman. So, you know, you highlight one of the challenges and things we're watching very closely is the expansive and growth in both capability and capacity of the security challengers in the region as it compares to ours. So let me start by saying we still have the world's greatest Navy. We need to maintain and keep that advantage, and there's a variety of ways that you can get to it. The CNO, again, just the other day talked about the unmanned capacity and how does that plug in. With regard to the A-sub-O, you know, through the Global Force Management System, we are operating through a supply-based model. That supply-based accounts for the sustainability in the near, mid, and long-term aspects. So we've operated in that construct, and we have to continue to watch the capability and capacity differences.
To take that a step further, not just U.S. capability and capacity and presence in the Asia-Pacific, but also the ability for us to leverage much more in-depth relationships with friends and allies in the region. That's a big place, lots of things to do. If we don't have friends that can help us in certain ways, our risk calculus becomes much, much more complex in order to place that risk on the Chinese. Give me your perspective about what you think that we need to be doing, and I'd love to hear Dr. Ratner's thoughts on this, about how we work with allies to a greater extent, like Japan, like Vietnam, like Australia. We know AUKUS, and you talked about that agreement. But I wanted to get a sense about how do we do that, and then how do we get to the point where we are not just having that relationship on paper, but that has to be manifested in how we operationalize that agreement. How do we jointly not only operate, but train together at the highest levels so that if something does happen, It's not, well, let's figure out how we communicate and those sorts of things. Give me your perspective on that.
I concur. So you don't surge trust and you don't just come together and operate. But what we're trying to do, again, over 120 exercises a year, and all of the chiefs got together in our discussions. The intent was, hey, we need to increase complexity of these to be able to be interoperable, interdependable. Some examples, we just finished Keen Age with the Japanese. My partner, General Yamazaki, and I met every day for 10 days in coordination with our forces. Really important, very high end. As we sit here today right now, the Army and the Marine Corps are both on the ground in the Philippines and in Thailand to do Cobra Gold and Balikatan. Those relationships are solid. We're about to do RIMPAC in a couple of months, the largest maritime exercise on the planet. I think over 27 nations coming together. And again, we've increased the complexity every year that, so those are the big ones. On the small front, every day we come together, if we come in contact with our allies and partners, the direction I've given the team is we are going to ensure we can quickly come together, be instantly interoperable, and then work together at any point, at any time. That's the approach we've taken.
Dr. Ratner.
Congressman, I'll just say we obviously have a very wide spectrum of partners, some of which we operate at a very high level, others which have less mature.
I do apologize to once time has expired. We try to move on. I should have said that up front. Even if you're still in the middle of a question, 5 minutes is the limit. We move on to the next member. So we'll have to take that last piece of it for the record. Mr. Kim is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ratner, I wanted to talk to you about allies and partners. It's something that you've raised, all of you have raised in terms of the importance of what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. We've seen in the European theater right now what allies and partners means when it comes to response to Ukraine. And I feel like it's an important moment to take a step back and gauge what allies and partners means in the Indo-Pacific, especially when it comes to a counterweight against the PRC. Dr. Ratner, you were just talking about India, for instance. You talked about the Quad. You talked about some of the challenges there when it comes to India's relationship with Russia, but you feel like that's moving in a better direction. I guess I just want to point blank ask you, do you assess that India is the reliable partner that we need? Is there any concerns on your end about the Quad, about India moving forward in terms of their actions when we will need them in the future?
Congressman, I perceive the U.S.-India defense relationship as one with incredible momentum. We're going to hold our highest, most senior level engagement with them in early April. That's a 2+2 with Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, and their counterparts. And that meeting will discuss a number of activities that not only are unprecedented, but are the kinds of things that would have been unimaginable 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So obviously there are challenges with the relationship with India, but I think they're manageable, and we are moving forward very rapidly in deepening the partnership.
I see those partnerships strengthening our ability to communicate, have that dialogue, do exercises. But I guess what I'd like to just get a sense of from you is, what does it mean for the allies and partners under duress? What does it mean to have this tested? So in the event of some type of conflict with China, I wanted to ask you, what specifically are the objectives? What would we want to see come to fruition when it comes to our allies and partners? How do we test and assess what that would look like under those types of strain that we see right now in Europe?
Congressman, it's obviously a very context-dependent question. In the case of India, we have seen a test case of this in the last several years when the Indians were facing aggression from China on the line of actual control, where the United States rapidly provided capabilities and intelligence, and in the context of trying to improve trust in the nature of the defense relationship, that was a defining moment. So this is about them being ready to support our efforts, but also us being ready to support theirs, and these are precisely the kind of conversations that we're having at a political military level with a number of our closest partners.
With the military, well, with the arrangements that we have when it comes to our partnerships in the Pacific, AUKUS, Quad, am I correct that, and I just want to double check on this, that none of these have any military requirements in the case that any of the other members get attacked something that would be more akin to what we have with NATO. Is that correct?
Congressman, neither the Quad nor AUKUS is a mutual defense treaty, but we do have mutual defense treaties bilaterally in the Indo-Pacific that are akin to NATO.
So when we're talking about, some of the situations that may occur, the one that we've talked about the most is about Chinese aggression upon Taiwan. I wanted to just ask what your confidence level is that the partners and the allies that we have in the Indo-Pacific, as of now, would step up in the way that we need.
Congressman, again, that varies from partner to partner, but I am confident that some of our closest partners would be with us in a Taiwan contingency.
So in terms of the overall, trajectory and the health of our partnerships in the region, how would you grade it? I'd like to just get a sense of your baseline right now and where we're trying to get towards.
Congressman, strengthening our alliance and partnerships has been an absolute centerpiece of the Biden-Harris administration. And in the Indo-Pacific, I think we have made considerable strides, including building upon some of the progress that was made during the Trump administration. And again, when I look around the region, partner after partner after partner, I see relationships that are stronger than they've ever been and that are on an upward trajectory.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Scott is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Ratner, I want to start with you. I mean, the illegal fishing from China is not limited to the Indo-PACOM. It goes all the way around to AFRICOM. General Townsend has suggested that the illegal fishing in Africa was going to lead to political unrest. Is there illegal fishing? Is that about money, or is that because they need the fish to feed their people?
Congressman, I think it's both an industrial interest as well as protein for their citizens.
Okay. I want to point out to you that, and I hope the Biden administration is paying attention to this, I hope we're all paying attention to this, Ukraine exports 50 million metric tons, 50 million metric tons of corn and wheat. Over a fourth of that goes into the Indo-Pacific region in Asia. And I think that we need to be doing some type of analysis on what the political and economic disruptions look like when that food is no longer hitting the global supply. They would normally be planting their crops right now. I think it's unlikely, obviously, based on what Russia has done, that food supply comes to the global network, for lack of better terminology. And I do think that all of our areas of responsibility need to be looking at what a reduction in food supply means for their particular areas. There are two primary sources of belligerence in this world right now. They are Russia and China. Admiral, at the end of World War II, the Soviet Union claimed that they owned the Kuril Islands. Those islands, my understanding is, belong to Japan. This dispute has been going on for 77 years. It's not one that's talked about much, but I do think it's important that as we try to resolve these issues that we, on territories, that we talk about all of them. Can you speak to what the United States can do to assist our Japanese ally again in that territory? Is this sovereign Russian territory, as the Russians claim, or do these islands belong to Japan?
So I'm going to defer that first part to Secretary Ratner, because I believe the U.S. doesn't take a policy or a position on those who owns what, right? What we would like to do is ensure that any of those disputes are taken peacefully and in accordance with international law. But there are multiple disputes, as you highlighted. The Kurils are only one. The Japanese are also worried about the Senkaku Islands to the south. And, there are hundreds of disputes throughout the South China Sea. So the position is to ensure a peaceful resolution of those disputes in accordance with international law. I don't know if Secretary Ratner has anything else.
Well, let me move to another area then. China is responsible for the majority, if not an extremely significant portion of the fentanyl that's coming into the world. Dr. Ratner, what is the Biden administration doing to stop the Chinese and the fentanyl that is coming into the world that seems to be unrestricted by the Chinese government?
Congressman, that's outside the purview of the Defense Department, but I'll be sure to get you an answer on that question from the relevant departments and agencies.
All right. Germany and other countries have been resistant to increasing their defense spending. Japan is one of our allies that spends about 1.3% of its GDP on defense. Are we seeing countries like Japan, based on the recent aggression from Russia and the conduct of China, are we seeing them move to increase their defense spending the way we've seen Germany and others recognize the current threats?
Congressman, we'll see. I know there are current discussions on that ongoing in Tokyo. These are obviously sensitive issues for them, given some of their constitutional issues and otherwise, but clearly they are seized of the mounting threat and challenge from the PRC.
I think as we see increased spending from those that share our interests and our values as Americans, I think we need to make sure that we're coordinating with them so that we get the most for the dollars that are spent. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Khanna is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ratner, could you briefly describe the United States' role in the 1962 border conflict between China and India under President Kennedy?
Congressman, I'll have to get back to you on the precise history on that.
The gist of it is that President Kennedy and the United States supported India in that conflict. And then when there was the border conflict in the June of 2020, when China violated the line of control, could you briefly describe the United States' role at that point?
Yes, Congressman, I wasn't in the seat at the time, but as I recently mentioned, the United States did rapidly provide certain intelligence and capabilities.
Did Russia do anything to protect India when China was violating the line of control, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
And did Russia, to your knowledge, do anything to protect India in 1962 when China violated the line of control?
Congressman, I'd be happy to get back to you on
that. To my knowledge, they didn't. And so both times when there has been a border dispute with India and China, it's the United States, actually, that has come to India's defense. And so I guess I'm perplexed why, and I say this as an Indian American, why India has abstained 3 times from the Security Council and is unwilling to condemn Putin's unprovoked aggression into Ukraine. Do you have a view on this, and has this been raised at the highest levels with the Indian government?
Congressman, I know we've been engaging with Indian leadership about this issue, and as I mentioned earlier in response to a question, we're aware that India has a long history and complicated economic and security partnership with the Russians. They receive a majority of their weapons from Russia historically, and that's something they've been working hard to wean themselves from. But defer to them to speak on their own exact decision-making on this.
There's 60% of weapons from Russia, but I guess let me ask you this. Do you think the United States or Russia are more likely to come to India's defense if the Chinese were to invade beyond the line of control?
The United States, Congressman.
Has that point been made to India?
Congressman, we are in deep strategic conversations about the future of our partnership with India. Like I said, we have our most senior level dialogue with the Indians next month, in which Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken will have an opportunity to speak with their counterparts about these critical issues.
What is the plan for India to get off the 60% reliance on Russian arms, and how fast can that happen if they wanted to switch to getting weapons from the United States or European allies?
Congressman, again, this is obviously a sovereign decision for the Indians. What we are encouraging them to do is to purchase more American capabilities, as you mentioned, work with other third parties, Europeans and others, and improve their own indigenization of their own defense sector. So those trends together are already underway. If you look over the last several years, the trend lines are moving in the right direction. I don't have an answer for a particular day on the calendar as to when they achieve a certain benchmark.
But putting aside what their own decision-making is, how quickly could it happen if they said, we want to switch as fast as possible? I mean, what would you say is a reasonable rate of reducing Russian dependence? I mean, could we get that number down 10% every year? Or what is a reasonable target if they said they wanted to do it?
Congressman, I'd be happy to get you a more precise answer to that question. I think it depends a lot on the nature of the specific capability, from munitions all the way up to much higher end capabilities.
I appreciate that. I'll just conclude by saying that I think it's obvious that the United States would stand against Chinese aggression on the line of control far more than Russia or Putin would, and that we really need to press India to not be as dependent on Russian defense and to be willing to condemn Putin's aggression in Ukraine, just like we would condemn Chinese aggression beyond the line of control. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dr. Desjardins is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Ratner, let's shift our attention to the tension between Chinese and Taiwan. As we know, the world is watching Ukraine and Russia conflict as we speak. And last October, President Biden made headlines when asked whether the United States would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked. And the president replied in the affirmative and said that we have a commitment to do that. Is this the department's official position on the perspective of the Taiwan-China conflict?
Congressman, the department's position is that the United States policies have not changed in terms of our One China policy, the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances as the foundation of our policy.
Okay. A lot of people seem to have mixed feelings about what exactly the United States should be doing in Ukraine. What's our commitments there? Contrast our response in Ukraine to what it would look like in China. As we know, China has been unpredictable and probably expedited in most of what we predicted about their capabilities and their advancement of their military forces. So with that in mind, if we see an unfortunate escalation in that region, what would Americans expect to see in our response there versus what they see in our response to Ukraine at this point?
Congressman, we could spend all day talking about the differences and similarities between Ukraine and Taiwan, and there are some of both. What I will say is when I look at the conflict in Ukraine, the lessons that I draw, number one, are the importance of Taiwan developing its own capabilities, and that's something, and its own defenses and deterrence, and that's something we're working with them on. The power of the unity of the West and the international community coming together around this kind of aggression is an important signal to potential aggressors in the Pacific, and also some of the economic measures that the United States and others have been willing to take to raise costs on Russia in this instance is also an important lesson.
Okay. Admiral, on that same line, what can we do to learn from, if there were mistakes in Ukraine, what can we learn from that, and how can we better prepare deterrence to China from attacking Taiwan in terms of what do you need for defense, and what can we do better?
Thanks, Congressman. So similar to what Secretary Ratner articulated, right, this is a real wake-up. There was some surprise over in Europe. I think that, number one, we have to look at this and say, hey, this could happen. And I have a sense of urgency to execute the missions the Secretary has assigned, which is to prevent this conflict. But it just goes back to what we talked about before. So there's some posture initiatives. We need to be more forward. We need to be more robust. So the posture positioning and the credible capability forward is the best way today.
Do we need to enhance their defense capabilities now?
Absolutely, sir, in accordance with the Taiwan Relations Act, and that is something that we're doing at every opportunity.
Okay. Admiral, let me finish with the disturbing aspects of China's modernization and specifically hypersonics. Going into the NDAA cycle, what do you need and what should we be focusing on in terms of research and development in terms of us fielding both offensive and defensive hypersonic weapons and capabilities?
So the Guam Defense System is the #1 priorities, as I've put forward in my unfunded list most recently, Congressman. That's on the defensive side. But to your point, right, in order to deter, there's both a defensive component and an offensive component. So some of our long-range capabilities in the form of hypersonics are also critical to ensure that we have both of those capabilities to deter.
Okay. I just have just a few seconds. I'll just note that my first question, Dr. Ratner, on what would it look like didn't get answered. And I understand it's a complicated question to answer if a conflict did arise in Taiwan, but just to prepare our country for what it will look like, is the defense of Taiwan different than what we're doing for Ukraine?
Yes, Mr. Congressman, I think it would be different.
Okay. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Before I recognize Representative Moulton, a reminder, there's a vote on the floor of the House. There's 4,000 people left to vote. It's a motion to adjourn. We'll just continue through the vote per the chair's instructions. Chair recognizes Representative Moulton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Aquilino, do you agree with the Marine Corps' expeditionary basing strategy to maintain pressure on China in the Pacific?
Yes, Congressman, I do. So as a part of deterrence against that competitor, it will take the entire joint force. I credit both the Commandant as well as the Chief of Staff of the Army to adjust their form, so the Marine Littoral Regiment concept to be able to be expeditionary, forward, and provide support from the land component.
Do you think the Navy has adequately resourced it?
The Department of the Navy, I know the Commandant's moving very quickly. There's some capabilities we would like faster.
The Marine Corps disagree. I mean, the Marine Corps feels that you don't have enough amphibious shipping devoted to this. And the reason is because when the Navy does their planning for this, they've used a readiness factor of 80% availability. The Marine Corps looks at historic operational availability, which is more like 63%. I guess it's been about 43%, literally half the planning number that you use in the past year. So I'm not sure how we square the wheel here.
Thanks, Congressman. I'll go back to the CNO and the Commandant and see where they believe they are. The initial setup of the littoral or the Marine Littoral Regiment is self-deployable via C-130 as they work through the
I understand, Admiral. Dr. Ratner, how do you plan to help resolve this disagreement? Because it's pretty fundamental. We don't need to leave Marines stranded on Pacific Islands because we don't have enough shipping.
Yeah, Congressman, it's an important point. I agree with Admiral Aquilino that these are important capabilities. I know they're beginning to stand up the first.
Yes, but my question is, how do you plan to resolve the dispute? It seems like a pretty fundamental disagreement if we don't have enough ships.
I think, Congressman, I'd be happy to get back to you in the context of the FY23 budget and how those capabilities.
Admiral Aquilino, just going back to you, 20 years ago, China had the largest land army in the world. It was a Cold War relic, and in fact, we barely paid it any mind because we weren't concerned about its effectiveness, and we probably took some solace in the fact that China was spending so much money to maintain it. In the last decade and a half, they've radically transformed their military, and rather than making massive investments in a land army, they actually cut it. They're making massive investments in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, drones. If your kids have drones, they were probably invented and manufactured in China. They clearly lead us in a lot of these areas. Do you believe that the Navy is transforming itself quickly enough to meet this rapidly transforming threat?
Thanks, Congressman. Boy, as I articulated before, I have a sense of urgency, and we absolutely need to move faster. I do believe the Navy's been focused on the PRC as the primary challenger, but there's some things that certainly could move faster.
Well, Admiral, I sincerely appreciate that answer because I think there haven't been enough leaders like yourself in the Navy who have acknowledged that that you really do need to move more quickly. If the Chinese attack us with an AI-enabled force, an autonomous weapon system of some sort, and we meet that with a American manned alternative, who do you expect to win? I know this is a highly theoretical question, but I'm curious of your view on these
My
matters.
view is the United States.
You are aware that in a recent DARPA simulation, an AI-enabled F-16 beat one of the Air Force's top F-16 pilots 5-0. Now, maybe Navy pilots are that much better, but that's not a good statistic.
Yes, sir, I have heard of that, but I'm unfamiliar with the details of the scenario or as it applied.
Well, I think we all need to be familiar with these details because this is the fight of the future. And if the Chinese beat us because they're more willing to invest in autonomous capabilities, and it proves that the autonomous capabilities are more effective than our manned force, as much as we love our manned force, we're going to be on the losing side of that equation. Dr. Ratner, I'm curious of your view on this situation, this matter.
Yeah, Congressman, I would just note that the department in the FY2 budget made its largest ever investment in research and development and testing and evaluation on these advanced capabilities. Just last month,
What percentage of the budget is that, Dr. Ratner?
I don't know the percentage off the top of my head. I'd be happy to get you that. And
It would be interesting to compare it to the percentage that China is investing in these capabilities to understand if we are, in fact, transforming our force quickly enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes Representative Kelly of Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question, and we're dealing with an approach bill today, and we're in March already. Can you guys tell me the true impacts that these continuing CRs that we do every time have had on your ability to maintain readiness, and what equipment do you have or don't have specifically in the last, in this current fiscal year? What deprivations has it caused you?
Thanks, Congressman. So in my statement, I articulated the need for predictable and sustained budgets. Again, with China being a near, mid, and far-term problem, it's even more critical. There's a ton of loss of buying power as it applies to the CRs. Those impacts are well known. From my perspective, though, it also prohibits any new starts. So when I talk about the Guam Defense System, mission partner environment, and our ability to link our ranges, those are 3 top priorities that we're just unable to start on based on that impact.
And General, real quickly.
It's the same, sir. I mean, we've had challenges with some maintenance issues, repair parts, and new starts.
I'm going to keep stomping my foot until some of these people around here listen to me and understand the disastrous consequences it has for our Department of Defense, especially in all of our agencies, but especially Department of Defense. I want to talk a little bit about fleet management, and especially when we're talking about our merchant fleet and the ability to resupply in that region. Having flown and gone to that region, it is a long haul, which makes the logistical chain really, really tough. What things, if you could ask, what do we need in our merchant fleet to get fuel?
Do you think China believes that the United States will defend Taiwan with U.S. forces if they were to use force against Taiwan?
I think I'd take that for a classified conversation.
Okay. So under the Taiwan Relations Act and the War Powers Act, does the president have the authority to intervene with U.S. forces, if this happened today, during an invasion of Taiwan without seeking the authorization of Congress?
I'm going to defer that one as a policy question to Secretary Ratner.
Okay, well, perhaps we can follow up on that because I wanted to get to sort of the last part of this. So this has been a debate that I think has been, elevated recently. So if the United States changed its policy of strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan to a policy of strategic clarity and guaranteed that it would come to the defense of Taiwan to maintain the status quo, would this be a deterrent to China?
I think as this conversation continues, if I were to look at the alternative between strategic ambiguity and strategic clarity, there are some believe that it would be a deterrent, and there are some that will believe it would be an accelerant. I think it's worthwhile of a deep, thoughtful conversation as we look at that option. I think there's pros and cons to both, but we ought to look very closely.
Okay, and then I know you didn't fully answer the earlier question, and this was the part I wanted to get to, is that, if China thinks that the United States will come to the defense of Taiwan, and you described there's sort of two camps in the strategic clarity, strategic ambiguity, can you explain, why would it be viewed as a provocative act for us to just be clear, to provide clarity, to say that the United States will come to the defense of Taiwan to maintain the status quo? So can you explain the people who would see it as provocative, that camp and their thought process?
I would say that based on the one China policy and the PRC's articulation of the importance, in the academic world, any movement towards the independence of Taiwan would be viewed very strongly by the PRC.
Okay, well, I just want to reiterate in my last few seconds, I think this is a very important debate. I think it's a debate that we need to be having now because, as I highlighted, the shortness of distance.
Mr. Gallagher is recognized for 5 minutes.
Admiral Aquilino, if the president came to you and said, Long, my top national security concern is preventing a PLA invasion of Taiwan, and I think it's going to happen in the next 5 years, but I'm having trouble understanding how and whether the bureaucracy is executing my top priority. So I need your help developing some metrics to help me understand if we're making progress, things that I could ask every morning when I get the PDB, whether we are doing X, Y, and Z. What would those top measurable metrics be? What would you recommend the president do in that scenario?
I think, Congressman, thanks. Boy, that's really complex, and we try to do it all the time, right? The assessment of where you sit is really complex, and there's a ton of variables. First, I would articulate, are we postured in the right places with the right credible force to be able to respond quickly and then to dominate in all those domains? So I would kind of do that type of measurement.
But things we can measure. I mean, I'm talking, it doesn't need to be complex. It could be missiles, could be ships, could be Taiwan's own investments. I mean, what are the most important things the president needs to be tracking to gauge our progress on deterring a PLA invasion of Taiwan?
I think it's again, I don't want to make it, well, first of all, it is really complex as I see it, right? I just can't say X missiles compared to Y missiles and we're good, right? It's the capability of those missiles. It's the survivability. It's the ability to get to where they need to go to launch. It's the ability to understand the target sets that you're going after. So that's why I go back to, it would be a comparison of how do I execute compared to the challenge in each domain would give me a decent sense, and we try to do that all the time.
Well, you mentioned your first response was basing or access. Could you talk then a little bit about, I mean, as I look at your AOR, I see a lot of U.S. flag possessions, Midway, Wake, territories, American Samoa, Northern Marianas. How, if we were to invest in hardening these possessions and territories, how would that contribute to your ability to deter a PLA invasion of Taiwan?
Yeah, it would absolutely allow us to both move further forward, right, west of the international date line. I have to be in place with the right capabilities to be effective. Second, it gets to the agile logistics piece that many of the members brought up, right, the ability to sustain forward such a long way from home. And it is one of our asymmetric advantages. We're seeing it play in the Ukraine, right? There's nobody else on the world that can do what we've done. If you look at what happened in the Middle East, it's a critical advantage, and we have to continue to mold it. That posture directly contributes to that.
Well, you see, we started to simplify a complex reality because presumably we in DOD and the president could measure the extent to which we're hardening our existing possessions or getting access agreements where we don't currently have them. And in terms of that latter issue, what is at the top of your priority list in terms of where you need access that we don't currently have?
It's not necessarily where we don't have, it's where we might want to expand. Again, I start with the 5 treaty allies, which are critically important. So Japan, we're in a very good place with Japan, and we have to maintain those places. The Philippines, critically strategic terrain, and we need to expand in the Philippines. We are expanding in Australia, as Secretary Ratner talked about. Thailand, also important. We have logistics support there from our ally. New places, India, we're working towards logistics support in India and additional cooperation that's been articulated. Singapore, we have 3 ships there in a logistics site. So to continue to sustain those and expand is the focus.
And I think another thing we could measure quite easily, actually, is what the Taiwans are buying and investing in. We talked a little bit about asymmetric defense. What do you want, 2 questions. What do you want them to buy? And would a security assistance program similar to what we have in Ukraine, beyond foreign military sales, help you accomplish your mission of defending Taiwan from a PLA invasion?
Yes, sir. At first, I left out Korea before, only because I don't want to step on my buddy General LaCamera's toes, but a critical treaty ally. On the capability piece, I'm truly encouraged, right? So the people of Taiwan bought 100 Harpoon systems. The focus there, we need to get them there quickly. The other capabilities that Secretary Ratner talked about, we need to make sure we have programs and ability. Whatever mechanisms that can be delivered to produce those and deliver them more quickly under the current environment would be helpful.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Kahele is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mahalo, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Ratner, Admiral Aguilino, General LaCamera for appearing here today. I'd like to thank personally Admiral Aguilino for calling me 2 days ago to share the decision by Secretary Austin to defuel and permanently shut down the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility in Hawaii. Admiral Aguilino, real simple, do I have your commitment to work with myself and the Hawaii Congressional Delegation to ensure that Red Hill is safely defueled within the timeline set forth by Secretary Austin?
Yes, Congressman.
Thank you for that commitment. I'd like to jump now, Admiral Aguilino, to your testimony, specifically developing regional partnerships. You just answered a question from my colleague about sustaining that posture forward, and I understand you were just in Palau earlier this year. As you know, compact negotiations with Palau and our other freely associated states and our allies there have stagnated. These nations are a critical part of U.S. national security policy, and our compacts with them address economic assistance, very important to these nations. Continuing that assistance is not only important as a national security matter in light of the region's competing geopolitical realities, but also as a moral matter in light of our shared history and the continued role that these nations continue to play in our national defense. So, Admiral Aguilino, given Palau's strategic importance to our country, how important is it that these agreements are expeditiously completed before they expire? And secondly, what is the DoD's position on investing in their critical infrastructure, such as the compact road, which has fallen into disrepair?
Thanks, Congressman. You know, as you and I have talked about before, the agreement of the compact of the free association team is really important. I do want to highlight that the lead for that event is the State Department, as supported by Department of the Interior. It's got a DoD representative on it, but it is critical. These are areas that we have deep people-to-people ties, and we are responsible for the defense of those nations. So we need to work through these. They become, renegotiation needs to be done in 23. DoD is supporting that event, but it would be critical to get those agreements worked through as soon as possible.
Any thoughts on the investment in critical infrastructure? Is it advisable to improve runways in Palau, in Peleliu, in Anguar, as well as their very, very important deep water seaport for the U.S. Military?
Absolutely, and as a part of the posture improvements and distribution we've talked about, there are many of those that are on our list. Matter of fact, the Marine Corps, along with the Navy Seabees, actually extended one of the runways in Palau based on our own capabilities to start some of that work. So some of it is in MILCON, others we can do with other funds appropriated, and we continue to work to improve those places.
Thank you for that answer. Dr. Ratner, the White House's 2022 Indo-Pacific Strategy document highlights the importance of building connections within and beyond the region through people-to-people exchanges. What are some of the soft power support systems and institutions that can help support this Indo-PACOM national security requirement?
Thank you, Congressman. I would defer to the State Department and other agencies on specific programs, but we are certainly looking to build economic linkages, people-to-people linkages, youth exchanges, and other areas.
You know, in Hawaii, Dr. Ratner, the East-West Center is uniquely postured to expand exactly what you talked about, the people-to-people exchanges that are necessary to build capacity and expertise in the region and its challenges. Do you believe that the DoD can dedicate more resources to these types of professional exchanges, and that within the Pacific Island region that this would be warranted?
Congressman, I'd be happy to get back to you specifically on the resourcing question, but as a matter of policy and strategy, it's certainly in our interest to strengthen and maintain those types of relationships.
All right, thank you, and mahalo, Chair. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And everyone, thank you for your service and dedication. Dr. Ratner, I'm very concerned. As a friend of India, India is the world's largest democracy. America is the oldest democracy. My father served there in the Flying Tigers during World War II, so I developed a great fondness for the people of India, the success of Indian Americans, and so it's become shocking that such a great country has abstained on the issues of the mass murder in Ukraine. And I'm concerned a lot of this is because of foreign military sales and the different technicalities and whatever. What's being done to address issues to make sure, as already been previously brought up by Democrats and Republicans, of their fondness for India, that we're not their main support of military, which is in the interest of the people of India and the people of the Indo-Pacific?
Congressman Wilson, we've had a chance to talk about this a little bit this morning. My response would be that I share your view of the importance of the U.S.-India relationship 100%. And we understand and recognize that they have a long, complicated history and security partnership with the Russians, but that they've been systematically diversifying away from that. And we've been engaging with them on that question, looking for them to purchase more U.S. systems, more European systems, and develop their own indigenous capabilities as well. And I think the trend lines are moving in the right direction.
And it just seems so unnatural. The relationship with Prime Minister Narendra Modi should be with the United States, not in any way associated by way of abstention with a megalomaniac Putin in Putin's war. And I'm just like, again, I saw our colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, appalled that there would be abstention by the great country of India. Additionally, I appreciate the questions from Congressman Gallagher concerning the defense of Taiwan. My father served Flying Tigers in Kunming, Shangtu, Xi'an, and had a great affection for the people of China. And out of that, I have such an appreciation. And my concern is for Chinese lives, Taiwanese lives. We've got to build up the defenses. I like the concept of a porcupine, that it would just be not in the interest of the CCP to attack Taiwan. And he was talking about the different levels of equipment, and you did too, and I appreciate that which is being purchased. Should we also look into a Lend-Lease, just as we, America, provided Lend-Lease to stop the Nazi siege of Leningrad, which was successful for the people of Russia that some of them have forgotten, but a Lend-Lease as being proposed for Ukraine to defend Kyiv from Russian or Putin aggression. Should we look for Lend-Lease to expedite to providing military equipment to Taiwan?
Congressman, we are currently in the process of evaluating all tools and authorities possible to expedite the provision of the necessary asymmetric capabilities to the Taiwans, precisely to reinforce the kind of deterrence that you're talking about.
And General LaCamera, I had the extraordinary opportunity due to Congressman Kurt Weldon in 2003. I'm the only person left who had been on that delegation to DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, to Pyongyang. And the comparison of Seoul, if you ever want the greatest comparison between free market capitalism and socialist totalitarianism, obviously, it's the Korean Peninsula. The success of South Korea, but I saw the Potemkin village, sadly, the horror of people subject to totalitarianism. And of course, this is a dictatorship that had been set up for the Kim family by Joseph Stalin, and now we're in the third generation. I share the concern of Congressman Turner and others about the artillery capability, particularly against Seoul, and how could this be addressed?
Thanks, Congressman. Part of it will be addressed in close air support and if the fight kicks off and how we would strike against it. But he's not just got the long-range artillery, he's developing other capabilities that give him really a 360 threat to the peninsula right now, which is concerning.
And I share the concern about the great territory of Guam. So please, every way to
Gentleman's
defend.
time has
Thank you. I yield
expired.
back.
Mr. Gallego is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to witnesses for joining us today. My question is for Mr. Ratner, Dr. Ratner, I should say. In your written remarks, you largely touched on the conventional capabilities that China is developing, but I'm increasing concern about the threat in the gray zone. If we draw any lessons from the ongoing war in Ukraine, it's that we need to ensure our allies and partners are too prickly for an adversary or competitor to swallow. And we've kind of discussed this about irregular warfare, and I think it's very crucial training. Do you believe the department has the authorities, though, it needs for special operation forces to collaborate with allies and partners in irregular warfare? And where can we further deepen or expand irregular warfare programs with allied partners and forces in the Indo-Pacific?
Congressman, maybe I'll defer to Admiral Aquilino to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing with partners currently in the region.
Yeah, thanks, Congressman. As you know, we do many JSETs. The Special Operations Command is extremely valuable. The SOCPAC commander is in many, many countries working to improve training capability and to support their special operations forces. At this point, I don't believe I need additional authorities.
Okay, so you don't believe you need additional authorities, including, well, just to be more specific, do we have the authority or the capability for us to do joint training with Vietnam, for example?
We do. To do our JSETs exercises and training, absolutely.
Okay. Admiral, you described the Seize the Initiative as the first step in building enduring advantages. I would argue that maintaining a robust defense intelligence posture in the Indo-Pacific region must be one of those priorities. I look forward to leading a CODEL to the region next month to conduct oversight of defense intelligence equities. To the extent that you can share your perspective in this unclassified forum, what do you see as the biggest intelligence gaps in the region? And what steps should we take to deepen intelligence cooperation with allies and partners from Northeast Asia to the freely associated states?
Thanks, Congressman. I hope you'll come through Hawaii on your travel. I look forward to meeting you and hosting you in person. Obviously, as I talked about before, this persistent battle space awareness is enabled by all-domain ISR. And while, from what we've watched over the past 20 years, we never have enough. So any capabilities, whether they be current, terrestrial, undersea, on the sea, above the sea, in space, or cyberspace, that delivers that persistent battle space awareness are desirable.
Okay, thank you, Admiral. And then, General, I wanted to ask you about the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. As you know, this effort is designed to strengthen our presence in the region, our infrastructure, and our logistics and maintenance capabilities. It also meant to enhance our exercise and security cooperation. How do you envision United States Forces Korea contributing to this initiative? And what role do you think the Republic of Korea itself can play in the furthering goals of PDI?
Thank you, Congressman. Our contribution, or the PDI for the defense of the Korean Peninsula, for me, is our ability to train with allies and partners. We've talked about Cobra Gold, Balikatan, Talisman Sabre, RIMPAC, and our ability, or my ability, to get Korean forces and U.S. forces integrated as a combined element, working with our allies and partners in the region.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Mr. Waltz is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to submit for the record
letter from the committee noting its concern about the lack of progress in the negotiations with Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Republic of Palau, and the renewal of the compacts of free association, particularly that there has not been a negotiator named yet, and we've had a lot of discussion about how critical that is to you, Admiral Aquilino and Dr. Ratner, but where's the negotiator? This is obviously a joint effort with Commerce and Interior and the Department. So this is a letter to the White House, to the President. I'd like to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Hearing no
Unanimous
objection,
consent.
so ordered.
Thank you. General LaCamera, we've had a lot of discussion about allies, and I think we are moving in the right direction. I'm worried we're not moving in the right direction fast enough. The threat briefs in terms of what China is prepared to do and overlaid with our pathway to get there to deter it are off in terms of the timeline. But in the event of a conflict, General, what is the government of South Korea, and understand that the votes are being counted, but generally speaking, they've had a common position, is the government of South Korea prepared to allow U.S. forces to operate from South Korean territory in the defense of Taiwan? In your opinion?
I think it would depend on if there was a threat to the Korean Peninsula.
So minus a threat to the Korean Peninsula, a threat to Taiwan, which would probably necessitate, from the Chinese perspective, attacks on Japan, are we going to be able to use those forces, 30,000 that are there, plus the associated air assets from South Korean territory?
Well, Congressman, my best military advice would be, what's the threat to the Korean Peninsula and what can we afford? You know, we still require combat power to secure the peninsula. So I think it would be a discussion with the South Korean government, with Admiral Aquilino, with the Secretary of Defense on what our obligations are on the peninsula and what's needed for the Taiwan fight.
Sounds like a non-answer, General.
To me, it's a hypothetical. I don't know the incoming government.
Are we incorporating into our planning use of those forces, potentially, obviously with the acquiescence of the South Korean government?
Are we? Mm-hmm. I have not been told.
And Admiral Aquilino count on your forces in the case of that fight when we're talking about forces forward?
Admiral Aquilino can count on me to execute my mission of protecting the Korean Peninsula.
Okay.
Congressman, I'd recommend taking this into a classified setting. I think we could give you a more fulsome answer to that question.
Okay, that would be great, and wish we could have talked about that yesterday. However, I do think that we do need to take a public posture and with the new South Korean government on what we're prepared to do and what they're prepared to do. And an associated question there is China going to lean on the North Korean government to ramp up tensions and to tie those forces down in a Taiwan Strait scenario? Dr. Ratner, we talked about harpoons, and currently the harpoons are due to be delivered 2025, I believe. Is that sufficient? I mean, by the time they're delivered and then we have the training and the operational capability, we're looking at 26, 27 to have a full capability. Is that sufficient? And what's the department going to do to accelerate that timeline?
Congressman, I wish they were arriving there yesterday. So I think as soon as we can get them there is better. And I can assure you we are turning over every rock to see how we can accelerate the provision of these capabilities. Okay. And we have dedicated personnel working across the department, across the Security Cooperation Department, and in discussions with partners about how we might be able to do that.
How can this committee help you do that?
I'll get back to you on that, Congressman.
Okay. Taiwanese need harpoons.
Yep.
As you said yesterday, I agree. The Ukrainians needed harpoons. That would have made a big difference in the defense of Odessa and Mariupol right now. We didn't, I don't think, do what we could to get those to them, and we're seeing the ramifications of that. I would hate to be having this conversation in 25 or 26.
Gentleman's
saying,
time
"We
has
could have done more."
expired.
Thank you.
Ms. Slotkin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you, gentlemen, and sorry that we've been coming in and out with votes. You know, I was in Taiwan over Thanksgiving. You guys have sponsored some really useful classified briefings and tabletop exercises that I've participated in, and it just keeps coming to me clearer and clearer that while we have military options and it is our job to prepare to counter China when and if we ever, God forbid, have a conflict, that we are just not using the other levers of American power, namely economic power, our cultural power, just a whole bunch of other things. And I don't want the Pentagon to feel like they are the lead foot in the debate and the engagement with China. So tell me, when are we going to have a strategy that you all can fit under? Dr. Ratner, help us understand how we're going to leverage the other things, because we're, as you've seen, we're watching things play out with Russia right now in Ukraine. No one wants to see Taiwan be the next Ukraine, but it's not just about you all and the stick. So what's the plan and the strategy?
Yep, Congresswoman, I fully agree with you that this needs to be a whole government approach. And I think as Beijing is looking at the crisis in Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine, it's important that they're seeing the kinds of economic measures that the United States is taking and the degree to which our diplomatic and economic and military actions are being done in concert with such a large group of countries from around the world. So I fully agree that there are the full
but we're going to see it. We're going to see the strategy, and it's going to lay it out, and it's going to be, I mean, we had a whole strategy around the Soviet Union, right? Containment was our whole of government strategy, and the Defense Department was part of it, but it wasn't the only part. I'm looking for that equivalent strategy on China. The country is looking for that equivalent strategy on China. I represent auto workers that have been laid off for the better part of the last year because of a 14-cent microchip that they can't get. So when are we going to see the global strategy that we're going to understand, simple, about what our plan is vis-a-vis China?
So my hope, Congressman Slotkin, is that the national security strategy will be out before too long. That's obviously not something that the Defense Department can control. And the national defense strategy as well will provide both a public and a classified version of how we're getting after this particular challenge.
Okay.
There are other efforts underway along the lines of what you're describing that are currently classified, and we can speak about in a different setting.
Okay, yeah, I would just say that the public strategy, the public needs to understand this issue, right? They're watching what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, and wondering when's the next shoe going to drop with China, and are we prepared? To that end, you know, we know that cyber attacks, attacks on our infrastructure, that those kinds of sort of short of traditional conventional war steps are things that we just have to assume the Chinese are thinking about if we get into conflict. And the average American has been on the receiving end of some kind of ransomware attack, cyber attack, and they don't understand what the government is doing to protect them. I know that's largely Homeland Security, but can you talk about cyber threats from China and what we are doing in an unclassified setting, I know, to show the American people that we're protecting them when they're on the front lines?
Thanks, Congresswoman. So that responsibility, as it applies to DOD, is in Cybercom Commander General Nakasone, and he's a great partner that we coordinate with all the time. So for the DOD critical infrastructure, right, he's taking steps, and he's got teams every day watching the defense of the global information grid and to ensure militarily. And as you articulated, the civilian aspect of that is done via Homeland Security.
Right. So I would offer, because I understand that's not your mission, right? But it is going to be part of warfare. It is already part of warfare. And we're the Defense Department here. We're the Armed Services Committee. So I would offer, I would love to see a briefing on this, classified or unclassified, with the Department of Homeland Security sitting right next to you all. Probably wouldn't hurt to get the State Department in there, but something that shows the American people that while we know we're the best fighting force in the world and we're going to kick some butt abroad, we're also coordinated when it comes to protecting back home. Just a gratuitous comment, but with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Banks is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I had to step out to go cast a procedural vote, so I missed a little bit of the testimony so far today, but I I did want to ask immediately, Dr. Ratner, it seems that we've established today that the threat of a Chinese invasion into Taiwan is more than ever before. I mean, is that fair to say?
I think there is a mounting threat of aggression from the PRC.
More than before, more than ever before.
With the capability that they have today, yes.
That's the message today.
They
More
have
than ever.
conducted
More than
acts
ever
of
before.
aggression in the past, so I wouldn't say more than ever before.
More than in recent years.
Yes, the threat is mounting.
Fair enough. Admiral, would you say that Taiwan is safer in 2022 than, say, just pulling something out of the hat, summer of 2019?
Congressman, thanks. I think they are seeing exactly what we're seeing, which is this increased aggression. I don't know how to measure whether they're safer or not. I think there's a growing concern based on what they've watched the PRC execute over the last number of years.
But we're here today because this increased aggression it's increasing, it's growing, it's more of a threat than it was before. In August 2019, Jake Sullivan debated Michael Pillsbury from the Hudson Institute, and he said, quote, "When it comes to the issue of Taiwan, 30 months into the Trump administration, it is more likely for the U.S. to be dragged into a war with China than 30 months ago. The Trump policy toward China is fundamentally not productive," end quote. Today, coincidentally, we are 14 months into the Biden administration, of which Mr. Sullivan is acting as President Biden's national security advisor. Admiral, are we less likely today to be dragged into a war with China over Taiwan as compared to 2019?
Sir, once again, I see increasing desire to build up and continue to grow their military capabilities. President Xi Jinping, in a public statement, said he wanted his forces modernized by 2027. He didn't articulate what he would do with them or when he would do it. But from where I sit, my responsibility is to ensure we're ready should that occur.
So, Dr. Ratner, what's changed? What's changed between the summer of 2019 and where we sit today? What is the fundamental difference in our foreign policy today that has led to an increased aggression, as the Admiral defined it, in China's posture toward Taiwan? What's different? Why now?
Congressman, I don't attribute Xi Jinping's growing aggression and assertiveness to the United States.
You don't? Okay, well, what's changed? What's changed? Why now? Why not then? If it doesn't have anything to do with the United States.
I'd be happy to share that assessment in a classified setting. His capabilities are growing, and his patience seems to be decreasing.
But you don't have an explanation for the American people about why.
Well, if I could jump in, Congressman. So again, this is about what the PRC has done, not what anyone else has done, right? They've taken lives on the Indian line of actual control. They have discounted their agreement as it applied to Hong Kong. They have locked up 1 million Muslims in Xinjiang. So their actions, the PRC actions, not U.S. actions, not any other nation's actions, are the things that give us concern. I think that's what you were getting to.
What I'm getting at is that Jake Sullivan said that this was more likely to happen on Donald Trump's watch because of Donald Trump's foreign policy. But instead, Dr. Ratner, you conceded that the threat is more real today than it has been at any point in recent years. Let me move on. Let me move on. North Korea restarted missile tests.
Regardless.
North Korea restarted missile tests in 2021 after a 4-year pause in testing. In 2022, North Korea conducted a record number of missile tests. Last Saturday, it conducted the 9th missile test this year. In addition, recent satellite images have shown North Korea seems to be building up nuclear testing. General, what factors do you think led North Korea to resume these provocative behaviors since 2021 after a rather long hiatus?
KJU claims it's because of sanctions and that we haven't come to the table. I think it's more internal for him. I think it's fairly complicated when you think of the Moon administration's on a transition. And I think, as we just talked about with China, I think he defers to China, but he's also looking to be autonomous. So while this threat is to the South and to the U.S.
I'm sorry, but the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Panetta is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Let me just get my questions. In regards to the other night, gentlemen, obviously thanks to all three of you for being here and appreciate your patience as well as your testimony and the information you're providing us. The other night, I had a good conversation with a representative of Taiwan, and obviously we were talking about Ukraine, and we were talking about how inspired we are by the Ukrainian people and how their population is all in on this, obviously. Obviously, then that pivoted to the people of Taiwan and talking about the National Guard and the conscription services that they have there. Obviously, that's something that I think was going to play an important part if there is any sort of invasion by the PRC. That being said, is there anything that we can do? Is there anything that the Taiwanese should do in order to increase the capacity, increase the will of the National Guard or those who are under conscription service in regards to what they can do to be more involved in their service or in their will to respond to a PRC attack?
Thanks, Congressman. I believe, well, I know for a fact that this is an initiative that's being developed and implemented to ensure that there's a robust, whether you want to call it National Guard, Reserve Force, or capability outside of the uniformed service to be able to defend their nation. So it's very important, and they are working diligently to develop that system.
Are we involved in any way of helping them in that?
As a part of the Taiwan Relations Act, we contribute to the support of their defense, and that includes both weapons via FMS capabilities that we've talked about, but also through services and training. Yes.
Right. Thank you. And Admiral, you talked about, I think it was in your questioning, in the question and answers to the chairman, you said, number one, we need a more integrated and sustainable ISR. Go into that a little bit, please. And how can we create a more robust exchange of our ISR with our allies?
Yeah, thanks, Congressman. Again, this persistent understanding in real time of the battle space is critical, and via contributions from all domains, with the ability to share it with our allies and partners through what I articulated through this mission partner environment. My number two funding priority, as you should have seen in my unfunded list, when you combine those together, those deliver a very strong capability as it applies to both deterrence and then, should deterrence fail, to be able to fight and win.
Dr. Ratner, anything to say on that?
Nothing to add. I support exactly what Admiral Aquilino articulated.
Gentlemen, after moving on to the violent extremist threat in the Philippines and in Indonesia, after our withdrawal from Afghanistan, did we see any uptick in either rhetoric or in capabilities by any VE groups in that area? And then subsequent to that, can you give an assessment of the VE groups at this point?
Thanks, Congressman. As you articulated, specifically in the southern Philippines, where we have helped our partner nation there to ensure they don't have a terrorist problem, those efforts continue, but I have not seen an uptick since the recent decision to depart Afghanistan. That said, we are concerned about foreign fighter flow. The SOCPAC commander has been tasked to ensure that we maintain vigilant, but I haven't seen a change as of now.
Thank you. And in Indonesia, anything, Admiral?
Again, it's the area we are always concerned about any increase in violent extremist organizations, and we continue to work with the Indonesians and support them as they also watch this issue.
Great. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Johnson for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. In 2019, the U.S. Transportation Command conducted a no-notice readiness exercise to test the organic surge fleet capacity to quickly mobilize for war. Out of 61 ships, just 27 were ready for sea after 120 hours. These vessels are over 40 years old, and readiness rates are likely declining further as they age, obviously. Previously, the department has indicated that it plans to rely on contract shipping to supplement logistics needs. So the question is, do you think that international shipping companies now will risk access to the Chinese market to support the U.S. in a conflict? I suppose that's for Dr. Ratner.
Congressman, this is Admiral Aquilino. If I could throw in here first. First of all, I thanked Congressman Courtney and the committee for the support to the TSP program, completely effective. I also endorse General Van Oost's and Admiral Mewborn's ability to go ahead and prove to us whether or not the system can respond. I think we highlighted some challenges that we have to fix. In my conversations with the CNO, he's working towards increased sea lift, the sustainability, the readiness, but all of those that come together help us to realize the distributed nature and the agile logistics that we need. So I don't know if I want to go hypothetically at your question. What I would say is we're doing the right things to ensure that those capabilities are ready, available when we need them.
That's good. Dr. Ratner, would you add anything to that?
I would just say, Congressman, we've received a number of questions during the hearing today and yesterday in the classified setting about these questions of logistics and contested logistics. It's an area of focus for the department and one that you'll be seeing reflected in both the National Defense Strategy and the FY23 budget.
Very good. Let me move on to something else, and I suppose any of the three of you could respond to this, but each of us, we all regularly see now the condemnation of Putin by Western governments and the media, certainly now, but our exposure to the perspectives of the Indo-Pacific nations is more limited here. So do you have insights for us on how Putin's invasion of Ukraine has affected Indo-Pacific perspectives on the American-led international order and the West's resolve to confront aggression in the Pacific? And I'm chiefly interested in nations of India, Thailand, Vietnam, other development partners, but also obviously would love to hear about our treaty allies, South Korea and the Philippines. And I apologize if y'all tread some of this ground already. Many of us have multiple hearings this morning, so we're bouncing in and out. But would any of you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, Congressman, I would. Again, I can't tell you at this point what the PRC has learned from watching the European issue. What I would say is I think I'm seeing the right lessons that we'd like to learn. Number one, the investment of blood in order to prosecute this illegal event. Second, the international condemnation and the unwillingness to accept it. And third, the drastic economic impacts to the people. Those are the right lessons should this switch over to the Indo-Pacific region, and I think I'd leave it there.
Yeah, Congressman, General LaCamera, I can tell you that Ukraine asked the ROC for military and non-combat items, and they're providing $10 million in humanitarian assistance. And this economic impact is caught what the Russians, and they're now an unfriendly nation, the ROC is. So there's $12.5 billion in energy resources from Russia to the Republic of Korea. So it is having an impact on Korea.
Let me ask one more question, and I'll direct this to Dr. Ratner. I'm not sure how much time I have left, but I'm just curious, and I guess we all are interested in knowing what investments we need to make in our allies and partners to protect against vulnerabilities that China may exploit in an effort to prevent them from offering us support in a conflict. And what specific investments in our defense industrial base, for example, can we make that would simultaneously reduce the dependence of our allies and partners on Chinese technology and manufacturing and finance, and also enhance our readiness?
Congressman, time is running out here before the chairman cuts me off. I'll just say we are engaged in multiple discussions with allies and partners specifically on the types of asymmetric capabilities that we think they need to best deter and deny PRC coercion and aggression.
Very good. I'll yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Houlihan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate the chance to ask a couple of questions. One of my